Hey, it's your guy Tyrrell back with the interviews. In today's video, we're going to briefly break down how Guardiola won the tactical battle over Mikel Arteta by reverting to Route 1 tactics to exploit the positioning of David Luiz. So when we break down the game and we do look at the board, we have Manchester City in a 4-3-3 with Sterling and Mahrez out in the wider areas, and Arsenal predominantly were in a 4-5-1. We didn't get to see much of how they would progress with Xhaka on the pitch, as he did leave the game early, and Dani Ceballos slotted into that left shuttler role with Willock dropping off towards the right. So when you look to assess the game, this was largely about how City would break down Arsenal. What you ended up seeing from City was they pressed from the front, and the manner in which they pressed from the front was interesting. They had Gabriel Jesus ahead of Leno, but he was blocking off the passing lane into Guendouzi. But out in the wider areas, you ended up seeing Mahrez and Sterling sitting ahead of the center backs, but blocking off the passing lanes into Bellerin and Tierney. With Gabriel Jesus ahead of Leno, if he did look to push forward, that would trigger Gundogan to step into the path of Guendouzi. That leaves De Bruyne and Silva ahead of Ceballos and Willock. And if the ball was shifted out into the wider areas over Sterling and Mahrez, then you would see De Bruyne or you would have Silva shifting out to those fullbacks. Although Manchester City's pressing from the front was effective, limiting Arsenal's ability to build from the back or create chances, what we can say was that if Arsenal were able to beat that first stage of the pressing, they were able to quickly shift the ball out to the free fullback on the opposite flank, given the fact that Sterling and Mahrez were looking to press the center backs, and that's how they were able to push forward into good attacking zones, but they frankly lacked the finish in and around that final third. So with Arsenal failing to cope with Manchester City's high press from the front, what you ended up seeing from City was that they had to find a way to maneuver around Arsenal's 4-5-1. The midfield battle was set with Guendouzi stepping out to Gundogan, and then you had Willock and Ceballos tasked with closing down David Silva and Kevin De Bruyne. Out in the wider areas, there was always a passing lane for Laporte, who was wrapping balls around the narrow Saka for Mendy. Saka did do a good job of recovering that movement, and out on the right-hand side, Aubameyang did look to gamble by blocking off the passing lane into the path of Kyle Walker and looking to force Garcia into some mistakes as he looked to push forward. Nevertheless, that outlet for Walker was available, and when you look up front, Sterling was struggling against Bellerin in the opening stages, and we didn't see much of Mahrez against Tierney. Ultimately, we could see some variation in City's overall movement. If you wanted Silva to drift out into those wider areas, and that could allow Sterling to move into space in between Bellerin and Mustafi and look to check in for the ball or look to break in behind. And the same thing can be said about Mahrez, who would be dropping off deeper towards the path of Ceballos, and that creates an avenue for De Bruyne to receive the ball in a deeper position towards that right touchline and force Tierney to step towards him, because if he doesn't, then De Bruyne can deliver those venomous crosses from that right side of the pitch. So when you assess how City were able to break down Arsenal's defense, there were multiple factors that contributed to Mikel Arteta's men's demise. You could look to Sterling's runs in behind, Mahrez's dribbling, the fact that they exploited David Luiz's positioning and his ability to consistently make mistakes, or the positioning of De Bruyne and Silva. Initially, it was De Bruyne in transition, ensuring that he could get away from Ceballos to initially play in Silva beyond Willock, and there was also a time where he used his body positioning to get across Guendouzi, and that also led to a quick counterattack. And the best chance that City created in those opening 20 minutes did involve De Bruyne's movement, but it also highlighted the manner in which City were looking to break down an Arsenal side, aiming to close them down in that midfield zone. It starts with Gundogan being pressed by Guendouzi, and he ends up dropping off the ball into the path of Garcia. Garcia locates De Bruyne dropping off a bit deeper, and De Bruyne ends up receiving that ball, pulling out Ceballos, and drops it back into Garcia, which now creates a lane for Garcia to split Aubameyang and Ceballos, for Mahrez dropping off narrow to pull out Tierney. What you end up seeing here is that you have Ceballos being pulled out by De Bruyne, you have Tierney being pulled out by Mahrez, but it also creates an avenue for Walker to finally push forward, and that's the gap that Garcia finds with his pass. Walker's able to break forward down that right channel, and he ends up running across Mari, who is shifting towards him into right half space, and he breaks towards the 6-yard box, and he locates the run of Jesus running across Mustafi, but the pullback is slightly beyond Jesus, and that was a wasted opportunity for Manchester City. Nevertheless, following that opportunity, we ended up seeing David Luiz replace Mari at center back, but City never really generated enough quality chances until the final 15 minutes of that opening half, despite Kevin De Bruyne's influence from transitional attacks. What we ended up seeing from De Bruyne was that he started to shift towards that left channel to create an overload in that midfield zone with David Silva. But when we continue to look at how City were able to unlock this Arsenal backline, it stemmed through Silva and De Bruyne gaining control of the game by varying their movement across that final third. We end up seeing Laporte slide the ball across Saka into David Silva shifting towards the left touchline. With Silva pulling out Bellerin and Sterling ahead of Willock, we also end up seeing the overlapping run of Mendy. Silva cuts across Bellerin and squares the ball out to Sterling, and he ends up getting the ball back and breaking a challenge with Bellerin to run at Mustafi. When he cuts across Mustafi, he ends up pulling the ball back across Ceballos into the path of Kevin De Bruyne, and with Tierney and Ceballos attracted to the ball, that allows Mahrez space to break into right half space. Kevin De Bruyne finds him, but Leno again is off his line and he denies Mahrez from point blank range. And when we look to one final example, it stems with Gundogan sliding the ball wide across Aubameyang into the path of Kyle Walker. Walker instantly pokes the ball out into Mahrez on that right touchline, and that ends up pulling out Tierney with Ceballos shifting over to ensure that Tierney isn't involved in a 1v1 battle with Mahrez. What you end up seeing there is that when Mahrez gets on that ball, we end up seeing Sterling darting across the center backs into that right half space. So when Sterling darts into that zone, he's now in a gap in between David Luiz, who isn't shifting over, and in behind Tierney, based off the fact that Gabriel Jesus is occupying both center backs. So with Ceballos out of position, Mahrez simply squares the ball to Kevin De Bruyne, and before Guendouzi can step into his path, De Bruyne plays the ball across Guendouzi into the path of Sterling, who's in between Tierney, Ceballos, and David Luiz, and Sterling's able to break towards goal with Leno off his line once again, but he attempts a chip that just goes over the net. Even when we break down the build-up to City's opener, we witness multiple reoccurring themes that occur before David Luiz's overall mistake. What you end up seeing here is this time it's Kyle Walker sliding the ball across Aubameyang into the path of Kevin De Bruyne shifting towards that right touchline on one of the rare occasions. When De Bruyne is on that right touchline, Ceballos doesn't step into his path because Mahrez drops off narrow. Now you need Tierney to step forward or Aubameyang to recover that run quickly, and we end up seeing Aubameyang shift over. But before we even get to that, what also happens on the left-hand side is that Silva shifts towards the touchline to pull out Bellerin. Bellerin keeps his positioning, but what happens here is that Sterling drifts central beyond Willock and ahead of Mustafi. So when De Bruyne receives that ball, what he ends up doing is that he tries to wrap it around David Luiz, for Sterling darting in between Mustafi and Bellerin into that right half space based off the fact that Jesus was occupying the center backs. And from there, David Luiz doesn't clear De Bruyne's poor ball and it falls into the path of Sterling, who's able to finish superbly beyond Leno. And when we look to the second half, Arsenal's attempt to shift their tactics was quickly denied by Manchester City playing long balls over the top. You ended up seeing Aubameyang blocking off the passing lane into Garcia and Nketiah stepping into Laporte, but that now allowed Ederson to utilize his playmaking skills from that goalkeeping position to get his teammates in good positions by bypassing Arsenal's press. City were able to create two legitimate goal scoring opportunities in those opening 2 minutes, and they both stemmed from Ederson. The first one ended up seeing that initial press from the front, but what we ended up seeing from City here was that Sterling shifted across Mustafi to pull him out of position, and you ended up seeing Gabriel Jesus drop off a bit deeper to pull out David Luiz. When Ederson now looks to play the ball over the top, he locates Mahrez running across Tierney goal side, and when he clips that perfect ball in behind that Arsenal defense, what simply does break down this attack is the fact that Mahrez's first touch isn't controlled and it falls into the path of Leno. And no less than a minute later, City followed a similar template to put the game out of reach. Once again, you have Aubameyang ahead of Garcia, but what should be located here is that Kevin De Bruyne dropped off deeper towards the halfway line, and that pulled out Ceballos. So now with Aubameyang out of position and De Bruyne pulling out Ceballos, that creates a gap for Kyle Walker to push forward. When Walker looks to push forward, you end up seeing Gabriel Jesus drop off deeper to pull out Mustafi, and Mahrez shifts narrow into that gap ahead of Tierney and David Luiz. So when Ederson locates the movement of Walker ahead of Tierney, Walker's able to win that header to nod it square into the path of Mahrez, and he takes his first touch across David Luiz, who isn't tight, and he's able to get goal side of Luiz before Luiz pulls him down to concede the penalty that Kevin De Bruyne converted. And following that goal, it was simply a training ground session that City were able to control as they were able to kill off the game. Hi everybody, thanks for watching, and subscribe here for your latest tactical analysis and daily commentary on the InnerViews show. And if that wasn't enough, don't forget you could find more organic, unfiltered soccer/football analysis on the InnerViews podcast, the best soccer/football podcast in the world, available on iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, and any Android apps on your Android devices.